Peter, may I introduce my father, Norman Osborn?
Heard so much about you.
Great honor to meet you, sir.
Harry tells me you're quite the science whiz. You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
This is proof that the best villains don't need an entrance, they need an introduction. Because Norman Osborn wasn't written like a man corrupted by power, he was written like a man finally liberated by it. And it was Dafoe's devastatingly controlled performance that forges all of this desperation, ego, and fractured fatherhood into a character that still remains one of the most technically complete villain performances ever put on film.
Here's the real truth.
There's a reason the introduction of a great villain sticks in your head forever. And weirdly enough, it usually has nothing to do with what the villain actually does in the scene. It's the setup around them, the timing, the atmosphere, the power dynamics, the feeling the movie creates before the character has even fully arrived. Because the best villain introductions are never just introductions, they're psychological architecture. Every choice is carefully engineered to tell your brain, this person matters.
Let's not stand on ceremony here.
And one of the biggest mistakes movies make is introducing the villain too late. The villain shows up without any emotional connection, no sense that this person existed before the plot needed them to. Think about Darth Maul in The Phantom Menace. He is universally praised for looking cool, but as a character, he's a blank slate. The movie spends zero time establishing his psychological stakes or his identity. He doesn't challenge the heroes emotionally. He is literally just a physical obstacle that exists to give the Jedi someone to fight. Now, there is one major exception to this rule, when the plot revolves around mystery.
Misery, misery, misery.
Sometimes, a film delays the villain on purpose, but when that works, it's because the movie spends the entire first act building mythology around them. Rumors, fragments, whispers. The absence becomes terrifying.
Honestly, have you ever seen anything like this?
Think about how long it took before you properly meet Raul Silva in Skyfall, or John Doe in Seven. By the time they appear, the movie has already filled the room with their presence. But Spider-Man did something completely different. Norman Osborn shows up almost immediately, within the first few minutes, before Peter gets powers, before the suit, before any of the spectacle. Before Norman Osborn ever deploys his arsenal, the movie wants you to understand the man who eventually will. Now look at Norman Osborn. Raimi completely avoided the traditional monster entrance. He pulls up to a high school in a Rolls Royce. Before he says a word, the car alone tells you this man exists in an entirely different universe from Peter. Raimi pushes the contrast even harder. Peter arrives late, sprinting after a school bus with a backpack on his shoulder. Norman arrives chauffeured. Then the scene narrows to just three people: Norman, Harry, and Peter. Norman dominates every interaction both in and out of the car without raising his voice. He humiliates Harry casually, corrects him instinctively, makes him feel small without even seeming aware he's doing it. Then, the second Peter starts talking about science, Norman completely shifts. That's the real power dynamic in that school scene. The emotional imbalance. Norman has more genuine enthusiasm for this random teenager than he's probably shown his own son in years.
Life is unfair.
A villain introduction has one job above all else: establish the level of threat. Not just physical threat, thematic threat, emotional threat, narrative weight. The movie threads that needle almost perfectly with Norman. Outwardly, he's untouchable, rich, brilliant, influential. The film establishes all of that immediately, but underneath, he's emotionally fractured, quietly unraveling in ways even he doesn't fully understand yet. That's the genius. The movie establishes Norman as powerful enough to become terrifying, while showing you the exact emotional cracks that will eventually split him open. Most blockbuster movies operate on what screenwriters call a positive change arc. That's the classic hero journey. A character starts the story believing something false about themselves or the world around them. Then, the movie breaks them apart piece by piece until they finally confront the truth and become a better version of themselves. Peter Parker is the textbook example. Then you've got flat arc characters. Those are the people who already know the truth from the beginning. They don't fundamentally change themselves, they change everybody else around them. Their beliefs get tested over and over, but they hold the line. Think of characters like Captain America. And by the way, if you've watched my previous video on how the Russo brothers achieved this with Cap, I go into much more detail on that. But Norman belongs to the third category, and it's the darkest one, the negative change arc. The best negative change arcs aren't about somebody randomly turning evil. They're about watching the worst parts of a person gradually stop hiding. And Raimi understood something critical about this structure. If you want the audience to fear the villain later, you first have to make them understand the person now. That's why Norman's introduction gives him recognizable pain, fear of failure, fear of losing everything he built, fear of becoming obsolete, the quiet loneliness of a man who buried himself so deeply in achievement that he forgot how to connect with his own son. And then the movie does something even smarter. It lets Norman perform genuine kindness, first in his encounter with Peter at the school. And the movie refuses to let that be a one-off moment. It carries that exact same warmth all the way to the Thanksgiving dinner scene. Just look at how Norman acts before the Goblin takes over.
Norman?
He brings a fruitcake. He genuinely charms Aunt May. He sits at that table because, underneath the corporate armor, he desperately craves the familial warmth that Peter has and his own life lacks. In that specific moment, the Goblin is quiet. Norman is just a man reaching out for connection. Great tragic villains can't just be evil. There has to be a version of them that could have been good, otherwise the tragedy doesn't land. Harry sees this dynamic right from the beginning.
He doesn't seem so bad.
Yeah, not if you're a genius. I think he wants to adopt you.
That line is funny, and also devastating, because it sets up an emotional thread that runs all the way through the film, through the sequels, all the way to No Way Home 20 years later. Norman Osborn doesn't hate Peter Parker. Norman Osborn loves Peter Parker. That's what makes everything that follows so absolutely brutal to watch. Because the tragedy of Spider-Man isn't that Peter is fighting a supervillain. It's that he's fighting a surrogate father who is trapped in the exact same body as a monster. And to figure out how to play that terrifying split, you have to look at the homework the director gave his lead actor. Before shooting started, Sam Raimi didn't hand Willem Dafoe a superhero comic. He handed him a novella, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And the most disturbing thing Stevenson ever wrote isn't the transformation itself, it's the reason Jekyll takes the potion. He takes it because he wanted to. He wanted the liberation. He wanted to do all the things the polished, respectable Dr. Jekyll couldn't do in public. Now look at Norman Osborn. When Norman walks into that isolation chamber and breathes in the green gas, against the desperate warnings of his own researcher, he is not making a mistake. He is making a choice. The Goblin doesn't show up and ruin Norman's life. The Goblin shows up and fixes it. He removes every obstacle that polished, respectable Norman Osborn was too constrained by civilization to remove himself. The suit isn't a prison. It's a permission slip. The real reason Norman Osborn's introduction has outlasted almost every other superhero villain of the 2000s is that Norman Osborn is understandable. What does he actually want? To not lose what he built. To be recognized for his brilliance. To be proud of his kid and have his kid be proud of him. To matter to someone the way Peter Parker immediately mattered to him. You felt at least one of those things. Probably more. No Way Home understood this completely when it brought Norman back 20 years later and strips away the Goblin entirely. The film asks you directly, is he? Was he ever? And what does it mean that you feel sorry for him anyway? That question was planted within 3 minutes. Outside of school, Norman Osborn wasn't born a monster. He just stopped pretending he wasn't one. And that, more than any glider, any green gas in a dark chamber, is what makes him terrifying. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love what we've got coming next. Subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.